Ena. I thought I can listen.
When we recite,
Что тут хорошо читать мантру Унцарва йога чита упатая ми. Подробнее, что это за мантра и как
Reciting
правильно ее
prayers.
начитать.
did you hear her?
No.
No. So the question is about the special mantra, about the meaning of the mantra, and I think His Holiness will just explain now what kind of mantra it is and the
I see.
meaning.
So she's just asked about a meaning of some
a
mantra.
special mantra, yes.
One special mantra that she asked His Holiness to explain the meaning of a mantra. Can I have? So with regard to the sixth session Guru Yoga, it's actually not just for recitation, but you have to actually meditate while reciting the text. So it starts with taking refuge, and then also goes on with to bodhicitta, generation of bodhicitta, and then you also visualize yourself as a deity, and then you also do the dedication of the different vows and reviewing the vows, the three types of vows. And then at the end, you make a supplication to the Lama, your guru, and the Lama dissolves into you, which means that you become indivisible, or you merge with the Lama, which doesn't exactly mean that you become one with the Lama as such, but what it means is that your mind is empty of any intrinsic existence, as well as the Lama's mind. And so of the Lama is empty of intrinsic existence. Therefore, within this Dharma Dhatu, the emptiness of the mind, you become of one taste. So it's not realistic to think that the Lama becomes you, one with you as such. As it is said in the Mahamudra prayer, please bless me. Please bless me so that my body and your body, my speech and your speech, my mind and your mind become indistinguishable. So Gongdang Rinpoche has also said all phenomena like illusion and like dream, they lack any intrinsic existence. And so you have to meditate on emptiness of the body, speech and mind of the Lama, as well as yours, your body, speech and mind, as empty of any intrinsic existence. So from within this clear light nature of the mind, the empty nature of the mind, you see your mind and the Lama's mind as being of one taste. And then the mantra Om Sarva Yoga Citta. Om is the beginning of the mantra. Sarva means all, Citta means mind, and yoga is meditation. And Utpataya mi, I don't remember the exact meaning of this. And so what this whole mantra means is that I will generate this all-encompassing yoga mind of bodhicitta. So what you're saying is that from now and forever you will not forget the practice of the two types of bodhicitta, that you will keep them. Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
В буддизме считается, что ум существует с безначальных времен, и, следовательно, мы живем уже бесконечное число жизней. Вот. Но мы до сих пор не достигли просветления, и, как кажется, маловероятным, что мы
So in Buddhism,
сможем достичь его сейчас, учитывая, что мы не достигли его до сих пор. И поэтому у меня возник вопрос, может быть, мы уже достигали просветления в прошлом?
Maybe we already gained enlightenment in previous lives.
Все, это вопрос.
That is the question.
In Buddhism, there is a belief that the mind is beginningless, and we have actually taken lots of rebirths in the past. And it is said that in the process, we would be able to. It's possible for us to become enlightened in the future. But perhaps he says that we are already enlightened.
We had enlightened, like
We have become enlightened. In the previous lives, we may have become enlightened. So His Holiness is saying that he mentioned that in Buddhism we say there is no self. So in science, science talks about Big Bang, and then after Big Bang, the universe kind of expands, and then it's said there will collapse. So the fact that the Big Bang actually happened is because of enormous amount of energy, and because of it, it can contain, and therefore there is this Big Bang. So Big Bang has to happen. It must have happened because of those energies that are made up of particles, and particles made up of energies. And therefore, since there are particles, there must be the substantial cause of those particles which have preceded. And so even at the subtlemost subatomic particles, we would have to say that there is no beginning to matter as such. And so if you try to trace the substantial cause of the matter, you will not be able to find a beginning or positive beginning as such. And so, and similarly, with regard to consciousness, it must come from a substantial cause, which is a consciousness, which must be a consciousness. Otherwise, a consciousness cannot have a substantial cause, which is matter. So when we talk about past life, reincarnation, we say that the mind or the consciousness which just conceived in a womb is not matter, but it's a consciousness. And so that consciousness, because it changes, it is a composed phenomena, and therefore, since there is change in it, it is certain that it has its course. So within which there are the substantial and the cooperative condition. So the substantial cause refers to that cause which actually transforms into the effect it gives rise to. And therefore, a matter which has no mind, which is inanimate or mindless, cannot become a substantial cause of consciousness, and vice versa. So the fact that consciousness has this awareness nature, cognitive nature, is its nature. And matter, the fact that matter is obstructive is its nature. So we talk about the elements, water, fire, earth, and wind. So they have their own nature or characteristics. So if it's not nature, then we would have to say that they are created by God. Of course, if you believe in theistic religions, theistic ideas of theistic religions, of course, then it's a different matter. In Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika, as well as Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, it is said that there is no creator God as such. Having said that, we cannot, we would be going too far if we say that things come without causes as well. And therefore, since we have to say that things come from compatible causes and that they have their substantial continuity, and therefore, in the matter, in terms of the matter, similarly, in terms of consciousness, there is no beginning. Because if we posit the creator-God theory, then it has logical fallacies. And to say that things come without causes and conditions also has logical fallacies. So we can see a lot of things around us that can be just experienced through our sensory perceptions directly. But there are other things which are not directly perceptible to our senses, but we can actually say that they do exist because of reasons that actually prove that. And so, if we were Buddhas in the past, but then became what we are now, that's actually something very strange idea, because you have not really understood what Buddhahood means. So Buddhahood is that state where you have completely, totally overcome all the defilements, the two types of defilements, completely from our mind stream. And you, through the application of the antidotes, and therefore these defilements cannot come back again. And if you ask why the water has this fluidity nature, it's nature, it's its nature. And consciousness has this, why consciousness has this characteristic of knowing and being aware of things, we would have to say this is its nature. So what we can say is, these, the distorted views, the distorted perceptions and conceptions, of course, were there also since time beginningless. And also, we would have to, we can also say that light has been there since beginningless time, and also darkness has been there since time beginningless. But where there is light, darkness immediately is dispelled. And similarly, the ignorance that we have has been there within us since time beginningless. But then the nature of mind, also being aware and cognitive, has also been there since time beginningless. But when we develop the understanding of the nature of things, reality and so forth, then this light will dispel the light of the darkness of ignorance. And so Master Nagarjuna in his Dhammadhatu Stova says, impermanence, selflessness, and the emptiness are meant for training the mind. Impermanence, suffering, and the gross understanding of selflessness are to train the mind. So when you develop or meditate on impermanence, your sense of permanence, notion of permanence of things is kind of reduced. And also, this will help us to think that we will live forever, and to overcome that. And similarly, by meditating on suffering, we see even changeable suffering as being something pleasant. And so because of that, we develop attachment, and therefore the understanding and meditation on emptiness, impermanence helps us to overcome the notion of permanence in things, and seeing or perceiving bliss or pleasure in those things which are in the nature of suffering also is overcome when we see the suffering nature. And then, because of some gross degree of self grasping at self, we become attached to these permanence and so forth, suffering. And so understanding selflessness at a gross level also helps us to overcome a certain degree of misunderstanding about suffering and impermanence. But if you understand the subtle, most selflessness or selflessness of persons, of course, that ignorance, when once is overcome, we can overcome all these other suffering and its causes. Of course, I do not claim to have much experience, realizations, but I have been meditating and practicing the Dharma for over 60 years. And on a daily basis, I meditate on emptiness. And because of that, I can feel that these gross states of negative emotions, the destructive emotions, do not arise in me. I do not meditate, particularly on impermanence or the gross level of selflessness. But because of meditation on emptiness, it actually shakes the root of this grasping at some kind of a true existence. At the crossroad of the six perceptions, where there is all kinds of appearances, things do appear to have some kind of intrinsic or objective existence, but do not cling to some kind of independent existence there, but meditate on emptiness. That's what Dalai Lama says. So you do not. When you talk about emptiness, it's not just kind of looking at some kind of entertainment or show, but actually meditation on emptiness shakes the root of our self-grasping. So if you study well and then think about emptiness and meditate on it, it will be really helpful. It's really beneficial. Even scientists today do experiment about these things, and they can actually talk about their own experience with regard to
в своих диспутах оспаривают другие философские школы. И, например, такой момент, как происхождение из себя, из другого, не себя, из себя, из другого и не из другого. И вот четвертый, еще один. Также в Шантидеве, например, говорится, что как меч не может себя рассечь, огонь себя осветить. Такой вот пример. И мне очень интересно узнать, в школе Энигма есть такие термины, как рангджунг и рангрик. Они как переводятся из себя появляющиеся и, и самопознающиеся. Мне кажется, они говорят несколько о разных вещах, Нигма и, например, Мадхьямики. Можно как-то это пояснить?
I see. So is the Shantideva talks about emptiness or something, and then in the Nyingma tradition also there's these terms such as Rangrik, self-awareness, or Rangjung, self-evolvement, and then also there's Madhyamaka view of emptiness. So are they two different things? So they are different. So Rangrik Rangsel, the self-illuminating or self-awareness. In Dzogchen terminology, there is Rigpa Sangtel, which is to say that the primordial wisdom, breakthrough of the primordial wisdom. So the term Rigpa is here used in a different sense, whereas when we study Lorik, the study of mind, the Rigpa is used in a generic sense of awareness. But in Dzogchen, when they use the term Rigpa, it is referred to the ultimate nature of cognitive or awareness nature that is that has to be actually experienced not through words but from your experience. So you have to come to know it through experience and not through words. And so the term they use is Rigpa Sangtel. And so in the striking the point in 3 words, there is a mention of Hedeva and Sangtel. Hedeva means just called focusing the mind, getting fixated at something. But then you don't stay there. Through the blessing and the introduction of the Lama to your Rigpa, this pristine awareness, then you actually experience the Sangtel, which is the breakthrough. And then this kind of experience can be also explained in relation to Guya Samaja, the 4 empties, which are called the first, second, third, and fourth emptinesses. And then there another term for these are the whitish appearance, reddish increase, blackish near attainment, and then the clear light of death. And so when you remain in the Rigpa nature, this pristine awareness nature of the mind, which has to come through your own experience of other aspects of this mind, then what happens is the grosser states of mind kind of dissolves. And to relate it to Guya Samaja, what is mentioned is that the gross wind and mind energy, mind and wind energy dissolve into the subtlest, and therefore you have the subtlest wind-mind energy. And so this, the awareness aspect of the pristine awareness, Rigpa, it actually permeates all different states of mind. And so through your experience, if you are able to separate or distinguish between the Rigpa and Sem in the sense of this clinging, mind clinging on to some kind of existence, independent existence, then you will be able to see what Rigpa actually is like. So this has to come through your own experience. And there are many Dzogchen paths. One of the Dzogchen paths is right here in front of us. But many Dzogchen paths, people who claim to be practicing Dzogchen, just remain in an unwavered state of mind, kind of a single-pointed focus. That's not Dzogchen, the actual Rigpa that you are recognizing. I saw a commentary on the Rigpa by a Nyingma master, and he uses the logic or reasoning to prove emptiness, which is to say the lack of one and many, in order to gain this realization of emptiness. So in this analysis, he uses the analysis of where the mind comes from, where it abides, and where it goes. And in order to explain that, he uses this logic. And then Gongdan Rinpoche has actually made a criticism of certain the Dzogchen practitioners regarding this. And therefore, we have to understand that the mere awareness of the mind being absent of shape and color and so forth, and matter and so forth, is not the final nature of mind itself. But the final nature of mind has to be understood as being the ultimate reality, which is to say emptiness. And therefore, we have to understand that the conventionality of the mind, the awareness nature, and its ultimate reality, which is emptiness, we must be able to keep them or put them together in our experience. And so in the Madhyamaka philosophy, we use the reasoning of the lack of one and many to demonstrate that things are empty of any its true existence. And so similarly, other reasonings like the lack of the four, called absence of production from the four corners and so forth, also are to demonstrate emptiness. And Dodrup Jime Tembe Nyima has said that Shime Zadel, which means groundless, rootless, absent of any root, has to be understood on the basis of studying the Panditas and the accomplished masters' writings. So the mere aware and clear nature or the luminous nature of the mind, when you are able to stay in it, and within that, if you actually are able to see the empty nature of the mind, then you will be actually going into the Dzogchen practice. And so Jigme Tempe Nyima also says that when demonstrating or explaining emptiness, it is true that one emphasizes the non-implicative negation, whereas when you actually meditate on emptiness, then you emphasize on the implicative negation. And that is a reference, in fact, to this pristine awareness nature within which you stay focused and you see the empty nature of the mind. And so it is complicated, isn't it? So of course, it is complicated, but you need to actually study and be able to strike the code well. So with regard to Dzogchen text, Dodrup Jigme Tembe Nyima's texts are very good. The third Dodrup Jigme Tembe, third Dodrup Jin Rinpoche, and his student, Drugu Tsulo. There are about 5 volumes of his writings. Very good. And so his books. And then a Geluk Geshe from a Geluk tradition, who was a student of Lama. His name is Nyengun Sungrapa. His writings are also very good in terms of Dzogchen. So sometimes the certain Dzogchen paths, people who proclaim to be practicing Dzogchen, are not able to hit home to their practice. I had one driver once when after a huge earthquake happened in Los Angeles area. I was there, and then my driver, I asked him if he was frightened, and he said no. And why he said that is because he said he meditated on Dzogchen. And so I was quite skeptical when he said that, because he may have just stayed in this fixated nature of mind, not being able to really get to that pristine nature and empty nature of the mind, but just single-pointed. So there are practitioners of Dzogchen who may have, of course, their experience of the Dzogchen, but when they actually come to explain the Dzogchen, they may have not really explained it well, as may not have been able to use the right terminology, as Gongtang Tenpe Dome also mentions, that perhaps you were not able to use the terminology well. So it would be difficult otherwise, just saying that there is nothing to be added, there's nothing to be subtracted, and seeing the perfect as the perfect, and then assume or pretend to be meditating on emptiness. That's not going to really hit home. So I have received teachings on the 7 treasures of Longchen Rabjampa's text, and I have received teachings on the Ati Yoga, within which there are those teachings of the Semde, Longde, and Mengade. The 3 sections of the section of mind, the section of the vast expanse, and then the section of pith instructions. So this Dzogchen practitioner here was a student of one Dzogchen Lama, who in turn was a student of Chugu Tsulu.
Если у человека профессия судьи, допустим, или человек профессии имеет воинскую, может ли он избавиться от неведения, сохранить все реализации? И каким образом это сделать? Достичь всех реализаций человек, у которого профессия судья, или человек, у которого профессия воинская какая-нибудь, воин, он защитник Отечества.
So can a military person avoid ignorance or overcome ignorance and gain realization? So during the time of the Buddha, there was a monk called Lamchungpa. And then Angulimala was also said to be the one with full of anger, and whereas this monk was full of ignorance. And so with regard to Angulimala, the Buddha used his skillful means and to avert or to stop him from committing killing. And later on, he became Arhat. And then, as it is said in the Anuttara Yoga Tantra, the Mahayana Anuttara Yoga Tantra by Maitreya, that we have Buddha nature within ourselves, this which means that ultimately every one of us can become a Buddha, and therefore one should not feel discouraged about that. But when it comes to being a military person, what one needs to do is, of course, whatever profession you may be in, you should be honest and dedicated and determined to help others. For example, if you sit on a high throne and with full of negative emotions, if you give teachings to others, then what you are actually doing is something which is not religious, not spiritual. Whereas even if you may be a military person, which actually means that you are in a position of killing somebody, but when you do your action, when you carry your duty with the sense of responsibility to help others, then that also can become positive.
Yes? Question?
Ваше Святейшество, в гарвардских лекциях у вас сказано, что после прекращения наработки новой кармы и пресечения устранения клеш, подпитывающих старую карму, можно освободиться от сансары. Однако человек в любом случае нарабатывает карму, положительную, отрицательную или нейтральную. Получается, освободиться от сансары можно только из Бордо? Человек может освободиться от сансары, только прекратив наработку кармы и избавиться от клеш, подпитывающих старую карму. Но человек карму нарабатывает в любом случае. Получается, что только из Бордо можно освободиться от сансары.
possible only when you are in Bordeaux.
Oh, yeah. So the question basically is about each moment we are actually creating karmas, new karmas. So once actually you go out of samsara, still each moment there is this karma being created. So what does this mean? That one can become enlightened only at the Bardo level? Strange question. So the whole thing actually comes down to emptiness, to the view of emptiness as the root. So of course, when you realize emptiness, of course you may not become a superior person, an Arya being right away, but what you can do is reduce the strength or the intensity of your karma that you have created to throw you in samsara. Aryadeva says that it is difficult for people to be skeptical and have doubt about emptiness. But when you think about emptiness, after hearing it, and also because of the reason that things are designated through dependence, dependent through designation, and that they do not have any objective existence. When you understand that, have heard this kind of reasoning to prove emptiness, what you can see is that so far we have actually been overcome with this clinging to some kind of objective existence in things. And therefore, since the grasping at true existence is the root of samsara, therefore meditation, thinking on emptiness, even a doubt on about emptiness actually turns wretched this samsara. So I'm not just saying it just like that. It is something which the Buddha himself has confirmed, and also Master Nagarjuna. Master Nagarjuna wasn't someone with blind faith, but he was a really intelligent person. And then other masters of the past, like Master Shantideva, the author of this text that we are going to go through, and also the Tibetan masters like Master Tsongkhapa, were really intelligent people. They were able to actually compare and contrast the teachings of the Buddha and other masters, and then see where to go. And from the time of the Buddha down to our masters, we have so many great scholars who have done lots of investigation into the nature of things. And so today, some scientists say that when we through our attachment and anger, we actually exaggerate things. And this is what Master Nagarjuna also mentions when he says that the karma and delusions are come about through our mental constructions. And so I know one American scientist, a psychiatrist, Aaron Beck by name. He has no idea about Master Nagarjuna as such. When I first met him, he was 84, and the last time I met him recently in America, he is now 96. And so for decades he has been working for people with psychiatric problem. And according to him, he says when somebody becomes angry at another person, that other person actually looks absolutely negative to this first person, whereas 90% of that negativeness is merely one's own mental projection. And so this is what a scientist is saying. And this is what we, in Master Nagarjuna's text, is referred to as this mental construction, like improper mentation. And so it's not something which we Tibetans made up as well. And so one Chinese met a Tibetan teacher and said that this kind of human life is very precious and rare to find. And then the Chinese in the audience said that, of course, the Lama would say this because he has not been to China proper. So when the Lama said that the human life is this kind of leisure, with leisure and opportunity, is very difficult to find by number, by nature, and so forth. And the Chinese disciple in the audience thought that the Lama had not been to China. And Changyur Rebbe Dorje has mentioned that in so in Lamrim Chemo there is mention of Dongkun Gyalpo, which means the king of Dongkun, and some people have actually interpreted this to mean that it's a reference to kind of a legend about amongst 1,000 the elephants. There is one elephant which is very special, and therefore it's actually shows up. And so that's actually, Changyur Rebbe Dorje said that this is because of not knowing Chinese. So the Chinese word, actually this is a reference to the Chinese king. So here Tong doesn't refer to elephants, the special elephant, but it's a name of the Chinese king, a kind of a race or dynasty. And so Master Nagarjuna actually studied all these teachings of the Buddha. And then Master Chandrakirti says that all our faults and shortcomings have their roots in our negative emotions. And Master Shantideva also says that the teaching on emptiness here is for the purpose of overcoming or clinging to some kind of true existence and things. Some people might think that when I talk about, when I mention scientists doing this and that, you may think that the Dalai Lama is actually taking reference from, making references to science and scientists and not our own traditional texts. But they do really call research and examine things thoroughly. And because of that, I'm making those references.
Dalai Rinpoche nga 벽에 겹네 드버 당나 디그레 봐.
어디지? 그냥 벽에 야고시 거다. 벽에 이거를 벽에 마시면 되는 거죠.
So he's saying you should speak a good Tibetan.
네, 장축 선배 초벌 죽배
in this Bodhisattva Charya Avatara. The 6th chapter shows patience. There are 2 verses. If something can be remedied, why worry? If something cannot be remedied, it cannot. What is the use of worrying?
Oh yes. So it's on page 54 in the English translation. Verse number 10. Why be unhappy? So I seem to understand the meaning when I read the Tibetan, but when I read the Russian and the English translations, it doesn't seem to give the same sense. So what is how do you actually explain? So how do you actually try to understand this meaning of this verse? And translate.
So the text actually, the verse says, why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? And this person actually seems to take reference to not unhappiness but happiness. So when I explain this text, I do so based on the Tibetan. And I received this teaching on Bodhisattva Avatara from Lama Tenzin Gyatsen Rinpoche, and he actually refers to also the Sanskrit sometimes. So one of the references Lama Rinpoche gave me is in the Sanskrit there is mention of miga. Toam miga means whether you are angry or unvirtuous in the Tibetan translation. But Lama Rinpoche actually corrected that and saying that the word unvirtuous in the Sanskrit actually is not unvirtuous, but it's unhappiness. So accordingly, I have adjusted to what Lama Rinpoche had told me. And then, of course, there are many translations of the Dharma books in different languages, like English, for example. It seems that the translators themselves use terminology with which they have most familiarity with. And there's no standardized kind of terminology in English. But in Tibetan, after we translated, the Tibetans translated text, then during the time of Tirabachan or our Dharma kings, it was these vocabularies were actually standardized. And so we have a standardized Dharma terminology, and therefore you perhaps do not need to resort to the translations in Russian or English, but if you actually have good Tibetan, then you can actually explain to people that you may tell that the translation says so and so, but it's not this way. The Tibetan says this and that. But do not speak Tibetan amongst Tibetans because you have no good pronunciation.
Ваше Святейшество, я хочу извиниться, что мой вопрос не такой глубокий, как предыдущие. Я хотел бы спросить, вот как правильно воспринимать светскую литературу? Как правильно воспринимать поэзию? Есть ли у вас любимые поэты, которые как-то помогают? Извините за мой вопрос.
Your Holiness, I'm sorry that my question. Your Holiness, I'm sorry that my question may be not so profound as the previous ones. It concerns the secular literature and poetry. Do you have any preferred poems or poets? And do you think that reading such literature is useful and important? And
So letters or words are the instrument that we use to express some content. So as a follower of the Nalanda tradition, we say that do not rely on the person but the teaching, do not rely on the words but meaning, and then do not rely on the provisional but the definitive, and do not rely on intellectual understanding but deep wisdom consciousness. So merely using beautiful language but without any substance is not so significant. So in Tibetan, we have a poetry book which shows or lays down the rules of poetry written by Dandi, the master Dandi, from Sanskrit, translated from Sanskrit into Tibetan, and also we study Sanskrit, the Sandhi and so forth. And if you understand poetry and Sanskrit, you would be able to be conversant in words. So most of the classic texts that we study are not so much written from a poetical point of view. They just use natural language to express the Dharma. So the rest of the people who have questions will take your questions tomorrow. Thank you. Where's my colleague? So to counter anger or hatred, of course, in the heat of the moment, it's difficult to counter it. It's like a huge blaze of blazing fire, which has already become so big to be doused. So before your anger gets really out of control, what you need to counter is this unhappiness, discomfort, or frustration in mind. We need to work with them. So when you become unhappy, slightly agitated, then it makes you unhappy. So the cause of anger are the 8 worldly concerns. Being happy when you are praised, unhappy when you are despised, and being happy when you gain something, being unhappy when you lose, and so forth. And so because of these conditions of 8 worldly mundane concerns, then you become slightly agitated, and that gives rise to anger. And therefore, you should try to actually have less of those mundane concerns, 8 mundane concerns. And then within this 8 worldly concerns, you have 4 which you like and 4 which you dislike. And so you would think in relation to yourself also, you would have this sense of revenge, or and similarly in relation to people whom you are related, like your near and dear ones, relatives and so forth. And when something bad happens to them, you become unhappy. When something good happens to them, you become happy. And when something bad happens to someone, your adversary, like enemy, you are happy. When something good happens to them, you are unhappy, and so forth. And so you should try to counter these kind of concerns, worldly concerns. So when you have suffering, you should not feel completely demoralized, because by thinking and reflecting on emptiness, you should actually strive to overcome its causes. So sometimes when you have suffering and misfortune, it can actually come as a blessing in disguise. Okay, so Holiness started from verse number 12. And now we are at verse number 13. So we all have the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. So with this kind of contaminated aggregate, we are bound to have suffering. And also this kind of contaminated aggregate that we have helps us to generate our attachment and hatred and so forth. And so as long as we have this kind of life form, which has come about through the force of our delusions, negative emotions, it says that if some ascetics and people of Karnapa endure the pain of cuts and burns for no reason, then for the sake of liberation, why have I no courage? So what we are doing is we are countering or confronting our negative emotions. When this has to be done, the result of this effort is something good. And therefore, you must endure those hardships, however much difficulty there is. And therefore, we need to counter it, we need the understanding of selflessness. And for that powerful wisdom of understanding emptiness, wisdom understanding, we need single-pointed concentration. And for that, we need morality, which is based on conscientiousness and also mindfulness and introspection. And so there is great difficulty, but the result is good. There is nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. So through becoming acquainted with small harms, I should learn to patiently accept greater harms. Verse number 14. So when I was returning from Rome, Actually, at the end of my trip, the pilot asked me to come in and have a look in the cockpit. So there are so many things that you have to actually get used to. The different machines and buttons and so forth. Of course, these pilots did not know about these right at birth, but not even as soon as they started learning. But through their training, through their going through the elementary schools and then high school, college, and then finally getting training and how to use those machines, the buttons and so forth. Then they get used. They have gotten used to how to actually proceed with these buttons and using them, switching off and on and off. So through training, it has become easy for them to manipulate those machines and buttons. So with regard to myself, year after year. I've studied them, and also when I come across certain particular words and expressions, I reflect on them, and then I've thought about how to progress along the path. There are so many different words and that we have to actually learn. And so, in the beginning, you learn them and by round, and then once you become acquainted and you've come across those words that you have learned, it's easier to understand the meaning. So who has seen this to be so, with trifling sufferings, such as bites of snakes and insects, feelings of hunger and thirst, and with such minor things as rashes? So of course, we will have misfortunes. So if you keep feeling frustrated with this, it's no use. But you have to think about the higher goal of what happens when you overcome them. I should not be impatient with heat or cold, wind and rain, sickness, bondage and beatings. So if you just complain when you have a really small problem, then it will not reduce, but you have to stand your ground firmly. So if I am, the harm they cause me will increase. Some, when they see their own blood, become especially brave and steady, but some, when they see the blood of others, faint and fall unconscious. These reactions come from the mind, being either steady or timid. Therefore, I should disregard harms caused to me and not be affected by suffering. And so, some people do not really fear when they see their own blood, whereas others become very frightened and faint by seeing the blood of others. And therefore, I should disregard harms caused to me and not be affected by suffering. Even when the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid and undefiled. So the wise here refers to someone who is wise in overcoming suffering and wise in cultivating happiness. So if you can maintain your calmness of mind, then your body also will be healthy. So between the physical health and comfort and mental health and comfort, or pain and pleasure, if you have a calm mind, a happy state of mind, it can outshine the physical suffering, pain. Whereas the physical bliss or comfort and the blissful, pleasant experiences cannot overcome the mental suffering as such. So if you are criticized or despised by other people, use bad language against you, of course, it will not harm you physically. Therefore, you should just remain neutral about them and try to preserve your happiness at the mental level. For when war is being waged against disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the time of battle. The victorious warriors are those who, having disregarded all suffering, vanquish the foes of hatred and so forth. Common warriors slay only corpse. So Kuno Lama Rinpoche used to tell me that these negative emotions, such as anger and so forth, will actually ruin us in the long run. And therefore, we have to confront and combat them. And therefore, such ignorant attachment and anger and so forth, which are used for our survival in a sense. Biologically, our physical body, these cells also have their own mechanism for survival through by using sunlight and warmth and so forth, to nurture them. itself. And then when virus and bacteria and so forth come into our body, there are antibodies that expel them or fight against them. And so similarly, in the external world, we can see the chemical reactions actually happening in the plants, such as sunflower, because it needs sunlight and warmth. And wherever the sun is, it actually moves towards that direction. There's no mind as such, but because it needs that. And then some plants actually close when at night, and so these are not because of mind, but because of needing for its survival. So with regards to attachment, it seems to actually attract others, whereas anger or hatred expels others. And so, because biologically we need to do that, therefore, it's not easy to combat our negative emotions. Kundalama Lama Rinpoche has said, told me that when we go to war, nobody goes as if they are going to some picnic, but they actually people go there with this concern, and therefore, similarly, when we fight against these negative emotions, there is lots of hardships that we will face. So people go to war with a view that of victory that they can see, and therefore they go to war. And therefore, similarly, just as we can actually win against the negative emotions and battle against them, we can see that if we actually fight or counter these negative emotions, we can see the effect of our effort, that we can actually reduce the intensity of negative emotions, hatred, anger, attachment, and so forth. So we can see it in our experience. Of course, someone who is said to be very angry, short-tempered, will not remain angry for 24 hours. And similarly, someone who is full of lust will not have that lust or 24 hours. It changes. The mind changes from one state to another, because the basic nature of the mind is not that of the attachment or anger. So with attachment, we actually attract people, accept things. And with hatred or anger, we reject things. So these are two opposite things. So they cannot happen at the same time, simultaneously. So similarly, the negative states of mind, negative emotions, and their counter force will not happen at the same time, simultaneously. But what we can see is that since we can cultivate the opposing forces, we can see that the basic nature of the mind is the knowing and clarity nature, and therefore our the counter forces to our attachment, anger, and so forth have the valid support of valid knowledge or cognition, whereas negative emotions do not have that. And then the positive, the counter force also have the support of the understanding of selflessness. Our love and compassion do not need the support of the clinging to some true existence of things as such. So when you think about anger, for example, can you be angry at the entire humanity as such? Can you think that I should, can you feel that I should kill the whole humanity as such with anger? Of course. When anger arises in us, you actually have a very absolute kind of target. You think this person must be overcome. This person is so bad, but you cannot think the entire humanity is so bad and become angry as such. Whereas, on the contrary, we can actually think, may all sentient beings, may all humanity, the whole humanity have happiness. So negative emotions need some independent targets that we can, as if, point at our fingers at, whereas wisdom does not need that. So anger, for example, needs the independent target. And then with our constructions, all kinds of preconceptions, then we actually strengthen this anger and it turns into hatred. And the most important thing to understand here is that the virtuous states of mind do not arise on the basis of our clinging to true existence. Whereas non-virtuous states of mind rooted in, therefore the virtuous states of mind cannot be countered by the understanding of emptiness. Whereas the negative states, the non-virtuous states of mind, because they are based and rooted in clinging to true existence, therefore understanding of selflessness actually can counter it. So you have to understand these kind of pros and cons of the negative emotions and the positive states of mind. So if you think carefully, you can actually feel convinced that these negative emotions that we have can be overcome. So furthermore, it says that victorious warriors are those who, having disregarded suffering, vanquish the foes of hatred and so forth. Now, furthermore, suffering has good qualities. So if you really give thought to this, then you can see the positive side of combating these negative emotions. So Master Nagarjuna has said that by thinking of sentient beings who are overpowered by negative emotions, although there is possibility for them to overcome their sufferings, but due to their due to their ignorance, they bind themselves to suffering. And therefore, once you understand that the things do not have any true existence, understanding of emptiness actually gives rise to compassion to others. So furthermore, suffering has good qualities. Through being disheartened with it, arrogance is dispelled. Compassion arises for those in cyclic existence. Negativity is shunned and joy is found in virtue. And so when you think about suffering, it has its own advantage. Because thinking about suffering actually quells or reduces our arrogance. And then when you look at suffering of other sentient beings, there you see that they are suffering because of the clinging to true existence things, which is actually a distorted view, and that there is a counterforce to that. Then when you see that sentient beings are overpowered by suffering because of being under the influence of this ignorance, then you feel compassion. And so when you see suffering, what you will do is you will shun negative actions and also find joy in the virtues. As I do not become angry with great sources of suffering such as jaundice, so when we have physical sufferings, illnesses, and also natural disasters, which are all things that cause us suffering, although we do not become angry at them as such, especially the natural disasters, we may feel how sad it is sad, but we will not become angry at the nature as such. So, when we are not angry with the nature, why we become angry? Why do we become angry? Why should we become angry at animate creatures? They too are provoked by conditions. Although they are not wished for, their sicknesses arise. And likewise, although they are not wished for, their disturbing conceptions forcibly arise. Without thinking, I shall be angry, people become angry with no resistance. And without thinking, I shall produce myself, likewise, anger itself is produced. All mistakes that occur and all the various kinds of wrongdoing arise through the force of conditions. They do not govern themselves. These conditions that assemble together have no intention to produce anything, and neither does their product have the intention to be produced. So when you are angry at somebody, you really think that this person provokes me anger, and you find some kind of an independent target. But if you look at the situation from a wider perspective, you'll see that this person has actually caused me harm because of such and such causes that actually added up to that person's engaging in the action. And therefore, the person has not been your enemy right from birth, also from the time beginningless. But because of certain conditions, the person has become someone who harms you. But when we get angry at that person, we see an independent target saying, this is the person who harms me. But when you look at it from a wider perspective, then you will actually see that you are actually going beyond what you conceive of the person. You might use bad language against that person whom you are angry at, but when you see there are so many other conditions that have actually led that person to harm you, and as a practitioner of religion, you would see that that person is governed or influenced by his or her negative emotions, and therefore he's not at fault, but the fault lies in the negative emotions, and then you will not get angry at the person as such. And then the Sankhya school says that there is a primal substance or primal factor, a prakriti, which actually is the source of everything. And then they say that this experiencer of pain and pleasure is an Atman, which is permanent, single, and autonomous. So that is what is referred in verse number 27, that which is asserted as primal substance and that which is imputed as self, since they are unproduced, do not arise after having purposefully thought, I shall arise in order to cause harm. So the primal substance or prakriti is said to have 3 qualifications. And the Sankhya school enumerates 25 different things. So if you say that everything has come from the primal substance, you'll find lots of logical fallacies at a close look at it. If they are unproduced or non-existent, then whatever wish they have to produce, harm will also not exist. Since the self would permanently apprehend its object, it follows that it would never cease to do so. And so this kind of permanent, single and autonomous self is said to be not dependent on any other condition. But that's not the case, it is being said. Furthermore, if the self were permanent, it would clearly be devoid of action like space. So even if it met with other conditions, how could its unchanging nature be affected? So if it's permanent, if the self is permanent, how can it change through conditions? Even if, when acted upon by other conditions, it remains as before. So even after conditions are met, it remains the same, unchanging. And then how can, it says, then what could actions do to it? Thus, if I say that this condition acts upon a permanent self, so if it's a permanent, of course, there cannot be any relation, causal relationship. How could the two ever be causally related? Hence, everything is governed by others, other factors, which in turn are governed by others. And in this way, nothing governs itself. And so, similarly, our pain, pleasure, and so forth, everything comes through in connection with other factors, in dependence upon other factors. For example, this climate today, the weather today, has its connection with the climate in the day earlier. And then in turn, we can go back to the previous week, month, year, decades and centuries, and then millions of years and so forth. So, of course, there could be some temporary adventitious conditions, but we can see how dependently things arise. They do not happen merely due to one cause, one factor. So we may talk about our relatives, friends, and foes, but they also are under conditions, influenced by conditions. So hence, having understood this, I should not become angry with phenomena which are like apparitions. So apparition here refers to the fact that things come through multiple causes and conditions, which you may not expect to happen, but they do come through those conditions. If everything is unreal like an apparition, then who is there to restrain what anger? Surely, in this case, restraint would be inappropriate. It would not be inappropriate because conventionally I must maintain that in dependence upon restraining anger, the stream of suffering is severed. So neither the person harmed nor the person harming do not have any independent existence. Independent means not contingent upon other forces. And also the action of hurting or harming do not have any independent existence. Sometimes people just say, oh, things are empty, because which actually reflects their own misunderstanding of emptiness. So when one sees an enemy or even a friend committing an improper action by thinking that such things arise from conditions, I shall remain in a happy frame of mind. Of course, neither the harmer nor the person being harmed do not have any intrinsic independent existence, yet they do come about through causes and conditions. And our suffering comes through our distorted misconceptions. And therefore, what we have to get at is the ultimate cause of all these misconceptions, which is this clinging to some kind of true existence, independent existence in things. Through that, we can actually overcome the misunderstandings and so forth, and suffering which ensue from there. So when one sees an enemy, if things were brought into being by choice, then since no one wishes to suffer, suffering would not occur to any embodied creature. So people or things that we become attached to or we become angry at do not have any independent existence, just as they do appear to have. So by thinking that such things arise from conditions, I shall remain in a happy frame of mind. If things were brought into being by choice, then since no one wishes to suffer, suffering would not occur to any embodied creature. There's nobody who want suffering. Through not being careful, people even harm themselves with thorns and other things. And for the sake of obtaining women and the like, they become obsessed and deprive themselves of food. And there are some who injure themselves through the unmeritorious deeds, or hanging themselves, leaping from cliffs, eating poison and unhealthy food. So when we are overcome with negative emotions, emotionally overcome, then people actually hit themselves on their head, as well as commit suicide. So I used to say I used to tell this story that I had a driver who came from Kalimpong region. He's a very short-tempered person, and in Nobulenga he was actually repairing the car. And while he was working, his bald head actually hit some part of the car, and she became angry immediately. And so what he did was he hit the car again and again with his head. What would that do to him? He would have more pain and nothing else. So of course the car will not feel pain. He would be suffering. But because of being overcome with anger, I mean, he had no choice. So he has no way of judging what is right and wrong. So people who destroy themselves and others in the world today are overcome under the sway of these negative emotions. And when the negative emotions gain the upper hand, then and we are out of control, your emotions are out of control. No reason would actually work for you. Even while you see the mistakes, the fault of what's going to happen from there, I mean, you cannot control yourself. And so these are the negative qualities or of negative emotions. So if when under the influence of disturbing conception, people will even kill their treasured selves, how can they be expected not to cause harm to the bodies of other living beings? Even if I cannot develop compassion for all such people who, through the arisal of disturbing emotions, set out to try and kill me and so forth, the last thing I should do is to become angry with them. So when you think about negative emotions, what you'll find is that you will do all sorts of things that harm others. And therefore, when you see other sentient beings overcome with negative emotions, you should feel compassion and not let yourself be swayed by negative emotions. Even if it were the nature of childish to cause harm to other beings, it would still be incorrect to be angry with them, for this would be like begrudging fire for having the nature of to burn. So if it's the nature of the childish to harm others, you should not get angry at them, just as you would not get angry at fire because it burns, because it's nature. That is its nature. Whereas if you think along the line that the nature of sentient beings is compassion, loving, then you would not think of harming them as well. It's not worth harming them because the basic nature is love. And so this is quite an important point to notice. Some scientists have done some experiments with children, very young children, where they were shown some animations. And one animation shows that something comes forth and another child is helping that to overcome the hurdle, and then the children like it, who watch it like it. Whereas when the thing is obstructed by something, the children dislike it. And so it's a human nature to like something which actually brings us together and dislike things which actually divide us. So we do not have to talk about those mental constructions, mental inappropriate mentation and so forth here. But this basic nature of human beings is love. And therefore, if you sustain this love, then it actually helps our body as well. So some scientists even say that for a few weeks after birth, if a child is held in the mother's embrace, then it really helps the enlargement and development of the brain of the child as well. Of course, the child cannot talk, but because of that embrace close to the mother's body and holding the baby close to the mother's body, the baby feels very secure, contented, and stays very calm. And so that in turn helps the cerebral cortex it helps enlargement of the cerebral cortex. So this physical touch itself is said to have that effect. So Bob Livingstone used to say that he was someone who was very strongly against nuclear weapons. He's no more with us, but he used to tell me these things. And so, naturally, by nature, we have the children, when they are held in mother's embrace, close to their body. If the mother doesn't love the child, of course, she will not do that. But because of that love, the child's life also starts under that kind of atmosphere, feeling. And so the greater the amount of love and care a child has received, the better his or her physical development and growth and brain also. And so this has to do with our biological factor. As you grow up, if you are surrounded by a loving atmosphere, the children are happier. Whereas if you are full of suspicion around you, then you will not have that kind of atmosphere of love. So when you are surrounded by a loving atmosphere, there's peace, calmness in the mind, and that in turn actually helps the physical development and growth. So we as human beings are social animals. We have to live together in community. So even animals who are social animals, there is a sense of community naturally. They do not have religion or law, but because of biology, the very biological factor, they have to live together in community. So as social animals, we too have to depend on the community. And therefore, what brings us together is love and compassion, whereas anger and hatred dispel us from each other, expel us from each other. And so, if you have love and compassion deep in your heart, then what you will do is be honest and humble, and then it also attracts others towards you. These attracts others towards you. Whereas if you think about yourself too much, self-importance, then you actually expel others from you, distance them. So wherever I meet people, whoever I meet, I always think that I am another human being. I don't think that I am a Tibetan, a Buddhist, or even a Dalai Lama. If I actually regard myself as somebody important, none of you are the Dalai Lama, so I'm alone. I'm the only person known as Dalai Lama. So if I emphasize this, then I would distance myself from you. Whereas with my openness, reaching out to others, I have lots of friends also. So sometimes you may be professors or rich people. If you actually emphasize those too much, those aspects of you too much, then you will actually distance yourself from others. So it's better to bring people together. So whether you have a religion or religious belief or not, as human beings living in community, we need love, compassion. We do not think of love or have love towards others because they are practitioners of Dharma or anything like that, but because they are humans. And therefore, this kind of unconditional, universal love, unbiased love, impartial love, is really helpful, especially in terms of Buddhism. We talk about all sentient beings, embracing all entire sentient being within our love, and it is very good. And therefore, love and compassion or affection, I emphasize on them not because of the text mentioning them, but because the scientists also through their experiment and research have found it to be really helpful, beneficial. So it would still be incorrect for anger, for this would be like a begrudging space for allowing smoke to arise in it. Verse number 41 on page 59. If I become angry with a wilder and so forth. So if someone hits you with a stick, you become angry at the person. The thing which directly causes you that pain is the stick. And then indirectly, the negative emotion, the anger in the person also is the cause for the pain. But we neither become angry at the stick nor his negative emotion, anger, but we become angry at the person. We can see sometimes if we hit a dog with a stone, what will happen is the dog actually, instead of attacking you, it runs after the rock, this stone. So in Tibet we have these wild yaks called dong. So when some people actually shoot guns at a dong, what the dong does is, because of the fire, what it sees is a smoke billowing from that point of the place where the bullet came from. And so the dong actually goes towards that smoke instead of finding the person who actually shot. So if there was only one person, then actually the dong would come to you. So therefore, in order to kill a dong, what Tibetans do is they actually surround the dong by a few people surround the dong and then shoot from different angles. And so, of course, I have not seen them myself. I have not seen them, but I was told these stories. And then Tibetan mastiff dogs, when they attack people, what the people sometimes do is give them hot potatoes, so that when they bite hot potatoes, their teeth actually fall out. And so what we need to be angry at, finally, is the negative emotion of that person who actually hit you with the stick. And so, should you be angry with the direct cause of your pain, you should be angry at the stick. If you should be angry at the indirect cause, you should be angry at the negative emotions. But what we become angry at is the person. So ultimately, we have to actually become angry at the negative emotion of the person, and not the person as such, because the person is overpowered by that negative emotion within him. So, although I am actually harmed by the stick, then since the perpetrator too is secondaries, being in turn incited by hatred, I should be angry with hatred instead. Previously, I must have caused similar harm. So what you are saying here is that ultimately, indirectly, you also are part of that pain because of your previous karmas to other sentient beings. Therefore, it is right for this harm to be returned to me who caused injury to others. So as long as we have this kind of psychophysical aggregate which has come through the negative emotions and karma, there is going to be suffering. Both the weapon and my body are the cause of my suffering. Since the other gave rise to the weapon and I to the body, with whom should I be angry? If in blind attachment I cling to this suffering abscess of a human form, which cannot bear to be touched, with whom should I be angry with it when it is hurt? So, verse number 45. So people become our enemies because of our own wrongdoings, our own negative emotions. We also provoke people to become angry and so forth. And so these come due to conditions. It is the fault of the Charitish that they are hurt, for although they do not wish to suffer, they are greatly attached to its causes. So why should they be angry with others? Just as the guardians of the hell worlds and the forest of razor sharp leaves, so is this suffering produced by actions. My actions, with whom, therefore, should I be angry? So because of my own negative karmas, I have these enemies, and they actually provoke, and they actually harm me, and through that they create causes which lead them to lower realms of existence, like hell being and so forth. And therefore you take the onus on yourself. So having been instigated by my own actions, those who cause me harm come into being. If by these actions they should fall into hell, surely isn't it I who am destroying them? And so what one should do is practice patience. Instead of becoming angry, in dependence upon them, I purify my transgressions by patiently accepting the harms that they cause. So because we have people who harm us, we have the opportunity to practice patience, and therefore you see those people who provoke anger or harm you as objects of feel grateful for them for giving this opportunity to practice patience. So if you practice patience, are you not actually creating negative karma? Since my mind is not physical, in no way can anyone destroy. But through its being greatly attached to my body, it is caused harm by physical suffering. So because your adversary, harms you, actually, if you retort and try to harm back, then there's more harm. Instead, if you practice patience, then slowly what happens is the anger and negative feelings of the person would also reduce. So verse number 52 shows not getting attached to praise and demoralized with criticism. Since my mind is not physical, So, of course, some unbearable suffering, when it's physical, it's something uncomfortable. Whereas, if it's something mental, so if someone actually criticizes you and you just happen to hear it and you become angry, when you find that person is actually saying something baseless, then you actually, instead of becoming angry, you will feel compassion and feel concern about that person. Whereas if you are criticized and if you become very sad and unhappy because of that more and more, then you will not be happy at all. So even the Buddha himself was criticized. And therefore, of course, it's quite acceptable, understandable that there are people who actually criticize me. The people who follow Shugden, the people of the Shugden organization criticize me. So I feel compassion towards them, even though they may use harsh language, saying even to the point that I was purposely born to destroy the tradition of Master Tsongkhapa. And so if you really be carefree and not really worry about what others say, criticism and so forth, then you will not disturb your happiness. So because others will dislike me, but since it will not devour me, either in this or in another life, why do I want this dislike? So if other people dislike me, it would lead you to hell ram. Similarly, Buddhahood cannot be achieved because others praise me. And I will not go to hell because others despise me. But if you think that if people criticize me, and if you worry that because of those criticisms, the offering from other people will also be less and less, and it says, because it will hinder my worldly gain, even if I do not want this, I shall have to leave my worldly gains behind, and my wrongdoing alone will remain. My wrongdoing alone will remain unmoved. For example, if people give me a diamond ring or diamond chain or something like that, of course, when I die, I would have to leave them behind, cannot take them with me. Whereas if people praise me, some people say that I am Chandrasik, Avalokiteshvara, and hearing those praises, if I feel that I'm somebody special all the time, then I would actually cause myself more trouble. On the contrary, if I think that I'm a simple Buddhist monk and I'm one of the 7 billion people on this earth, and then I see that we as sentient beings are being overcome with negative emotions, actually ruin ourselves. And therefore, just as the Buddha has taught that the negative emotions are what we are actually bound, what bind us in suffering, and therefore I should not actually let myself be carried away by them, then that actually brings more peace of mind within myself. Seeing how these negative emotions are not necessary, because if I let myself be carried away by them, I would suffer, and so forth. So if you let yourself be carried away by the circumstances where there is lots of misfortune, then, of course, nothing will help you. Whereas, even if you face all kinds of problems, and if you still can stand your ground with the understanding of the teaching, then I would be actually making myself a worthy monk or a follower of the Buddha. Thus, it is better that I die today than live a long but wicked life. For even if people like me should live a long time, there will always be suffering, the suffering of death. Verse number 57. '59. Although I may live happily for a long time through obtaining a great deal of material wealth, I shall go forth empty-handed and destitute, just like having been robbed by a thief. So Master Potowa used to pray that may the sinners live a short life. So he considers that for them it's better to live a shorter life since they spend their life in sin. Surely material wealth will enable me to live, and then I shall be able to consume transgressions and do good. But if I am angry on account of it, will not my merit be consumed and transgression increase? And what use will be the life of one who only commits wrongdoing? And if for the sake of material gain one causes the merits needed for life to generate, surely. So if people denigrate the Buddha and cause rift in the Sangha and actually destroy the stupas, it says, surely should I be angry with those who say unpleasant things that weaken others being confident in me. In the same way, why am I not angry with people who say unpleasant things? If I can patiently accept this lack of confidence because it is related to someone else, then why am I not patient with unpleasant words about myself, since they are related to the arising of disturbing conceptions? Should others talk badly of or even destroy holy images, the reliquary and the sacred dharma, it is improper for me to resent it, for the Buddhas can never be injured. So the more attached you are to something, even if some slight provocation that would actually give rise to anger, attachment actually gathers people, whereas anger expels people from you. So although this is the case, but the more attachment, the greater attachment you have, you will be more prone to becoming angry. So it's already 3 o'clock. Verse number 75 finished. Yet now, since great meaning will accrue from harm which is not even a fraction of that, I should indeed be solely joyful towards such suffering that dispels the harms of all. So if you have questions, and if you are interested, and if you're not tired, take some break and rest. Then after this, you should have a discussion session. So if you are tired and you don't feel like doing discussion during this. So in Dharamsala, during the Mongolian teachings, I asked the Mongolians to have discussion amongst themselves. And then the Mongolians had asked, will the Dalai Lama come for this review session? And when they heard that no, His Holiness is not coming, then they didn't actually take interest in having any discussion. So we have to, what you have to think that when we engage in this kind of discourse, you should take it, consider it as if you are having a class on the Buddha Dharma, and I am the professor, and that I'm the professor, and then other people who help with the review session are the smaller teachers.